Hey y'all, welcome to my Nahida guide as of Genshin Impact 4.4. She's getting a rerun in this patch, so I figured this would be the best time to release a guide for both new and old Nahida havers. Nahida, ever since her launch, hell even before her launch, was and still is the overall best DENDRO applicator in the game to date. Not only that, but she also contributes a fair amount of her own damage as well. She's got amazing area coverage, the uptime and damage to match it, and on top of that, a huge EM buff for the active character based on who has the highest within the party. In this guide, I'll be going over all of those, including best artifact sets, stats, weapons, and teams to give you a complete understanding of Nahida. So without further ado, let's hop into it, starting with her talents. Nahida's normal attack is not all that strong on its own, but it is another source of DENDRO application. Her attacks follow standard ICD, aka internal cooldown rules, meaning the character's element is only applied every 2.5 seconds or 3 hits. But I'm mentioning this because Nahida's normal and charge attacks are on separate timers, meaning that you can mismatch the timing for more DENDRO application. Next up, the main part of Nahida's moveset, as well as why she is extremely good. Her elemental skill, all schemes to know. This skill has two variants, a tap and a hold. When tapping, Nahida will swing a mark in a small area around her, dealing DENDRO damage and apply the Seed of Skanda mark on enemies. When you hold it, Nahida will go into an aiming mode where that same mark will be applied to enemies inside the camera box. You can have up to 8 enemies marked with this at once, so just swing your camera. Enemies that have this mark on them will be linked together if they're close enough, and when you trigger an elemental reaction on one of them, all of them will take DENDRO damage scaling off of Nahida's attack and EM called the Tri-Karma Purification, up to once every 2.5 seconds at base. This ability is crazy due to basically having a super wide range of coverage as well as the mark itself lasting for 25 seconds on an enemy. On top of that, the elemental skill used to apply it only has a 5-second cooldown, and 6 when you hold it. And that standard ICD thing I was talking about with the normal attacks, yeah, that doesn't matter for this skill since it has its own timer of 1 second, meaning it actually just applies DENDRO on every hit. That last part is especially helpful because of what her burst does. Nahida's burst essentially takes all the broken parts of her skill and makes them even more broken. On cast, she summons a field called the Shrine of Maya that gives her different buffs depending on what other elements as well as how many of them you have in the party. Having a Pyro character in the party will boost the damage per Tri-Karma Purification hit. Electro will decrease the time in between Tri-Karma hits, meaning that it can trigger more than once every 2.5 seconds. And lastly, having a Hydro character in the party will elongate the burst's duration. The rest of the buffs are nice, sure, but that last one makes the burst longer, meaning that with it already having a 15-second duration and a 13.5-second cooldown, it can lap its own cooldown with the extension you get from having a Hydro teammate. Not to mention, it costs 50 energy to cast, which is not an awful lot in actual gameplay. Now, even though it sounds broken, it also might not be worth casting. Oftentimes, her skill is good enough for clearing content on its own, and the long cast time of this burst as well as having to build for ER may just make you lose damage instead. Still, this burst is definitely worth using in a couple cases. 1. Teams with 1 or more electro characters for faster Aggravate triggers, and 2. If the team or on-field character wants the buff that her first Ascension passive gives. After Nahida's burst is cast, the active character gains an EM buff of 25% of the party member with the highest, up to 250 EM, Nahida included. This can be a pretty big buff if the on-fielder is the one triggering the reactions, or just used by an ability to snapshot it. This passive is in effect even if Nahida herself is the on-fielder as well as the one with the highest stat. Note that the buff is based on the character with the highest EM in the party, which doesn't have to be Nahida. And as if you needed more reason to build EM, Nahida's 4th Ascension passive will solidify that. Every point of EM that Nahida has above 200 will give the Tri-Karma Purification text from her skill a 0.1% damage bonus and a 0.03% crit rate buff, up to 80% damage bonus and 24% crit rate. In other words, building Nahida with 1000 EM will cap it out. Pretty simple. More EM means more Tri-Karma damage. And that's it for what Nahida's talents do. Now that you know all that, let's move on to talent level priority. Before we get into that though, since DENDRO's reaction damage is partly based off of your character's level, you'd want to get Nahida to level 90 first so that your reactions can scale off the highest base number possible. But moving on to the actual talent priority, level up her elemental skill first as that is her biggest source of damage. Second is her burst for the damage and duration increase along with the trigger interval decrease. Lastly is her normal attack. You can choose to level it or keep it at level 1. It does an alright amount of damage, but it's mostly there to apply DENDRO and trigger reactions, both of which have nothing to do with its talent level. That's it for Nahida's talents. Now let's go over how to build her so you can turn her into the canonical DENDRO Archon. First up are her preferred artifact sets. Nahida's got a few options when it comes to those, but by far her best is the 4-piece set of Deepwood Memories. 15% Dendro damage bonus on the 2 set, and 30% Dendro resistance reduction when the wielder hits an elemental skill or burst on the 4 set. This set single-handedly gives an increase to all Dendro damage, and while other characters on the team can hold it, Nahida is easily the best candidate for it. Second and third are the 4-piece sets of Gilded Dreams and Golden Troop. These can help Nahida's personal damage, but rarely is that increase worth more than the Dendro res reduction on 4-piece Deepwood. Still, if you have these and not Deepwood, use them until you do have a 4-piece of Deepwood. Last one I'll go over is the 4-piece set of Tenacity of the Millilith. This set can potentially hold the same or more value as 4-piece Deepwood if the rest of your team is attack scaling and doing significantly more damage than Nahida. The attack buff is pretty easy to keep active since its timer is every 3.5 seconds, whereas Nahida's skill, at worst, hits once every 2.5 seconds. Those are some fantastic sets that Nahida can hold. Alright, now you've got an idea of the domain to be farming in, but what stats should you hold on to? Let's get into that. Okay, this could get extremely convoluted, but for the short of it, your options are EM for her sands because it scales better than attack, EM or Dendro damage bonus on her goblet, and EM or crit percent, whichever crit you need more of, should you decide to use it, for her circlet. Realistically, you can go for any mix of any of those main stats and she'll still do great. But let's get more specific. Nahida's artifact builds can be split up into 2 categories, off-field and on-field. If you're going for an off-field support build where she's just being swapped in to use her skill and burst, you should prioritize ER until you can burst as needed. Next is EM, as much as you can get to boost the effects of both her passives. And finally, crit. Any stray attack rolls aren't too bad either. If you're planning to use her on-field, your substat priority then changes to ER first again, Dendro damage bonus second, crit percent third, EM, and lastly attack percent. Reason for this being that her normal and charge attacks don't scale off of EM, and well, you'd primarily be using those in this playstyle. So Dendro damage and crit can come out to be a lot better. So now you've got her artifacts. But what weapons are good for her? Nahida has way too many options when it comes to weapons ranging from situationally good to overall amazing, so let's go through them. Obligatory mention of Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers. You may not like it, but as a 3-star catalyst that can easily be refined, it's a situationally fantastic option given that your team cares about attack. Okay, moving on from that, we have the Magic Guide. The other easy 3-star to refine, mostly for the EM substat, because the effect is inconsistent at best due to how overpowering Nahida's own Dendro application is. Third is the Prototype Amber. If you don't mind shaving off a chunk of Nahida's own damage either from her normal attacks or elemental skill, this weapon can basically make up for not running a healer in the party, on top of lowering her own ER requirements in the process. Next is the Inazuman craftable Hakushin Ring. This weapon can be pretty good if you're running electro characters with her to get the 10 to 20% elemental damage bonus for on-fielding Nahida, or just for the ER secondary stat to make up her requirement. Speaking of craftables, the Mappa Mare is also not a bad pick. Do note that the EM substat is worse on this than Magic Guides, so it's generally worse for off-field Nahida, but it does come out to be situationally better in an on-field build if you can consistently keep Magic Guides effect active. Those are your free-to-play options. From here on, it's gacha or paid weapons. Starting off is the Favonius Codex. Look, it's just a habit. I've got to mention Favonius at one point or another for most characters. If you're playing Nahida on-field, this is amazing for lowering your team's ER requirements at high refinements, but off-field, you're better off using other options since you're not likely to have all that much crit rate. I'll just lump these next few together since they all perform about the same to one another. The Widzith, Lost Prayer to the Sacred Winds, and Solar Pearl are all great on-field Nahida picks. The version 4 Battle Pass's Sacrificial Jade is also in the same ballpark, but for off-field Nahida and will have 100% uptime on the passive for the EM buff. After those, Wandering Evenstar is another great option, being particularly good if the team favors attack, to the point of rivaling Nahida's signature, Thousand Floating Dreams. Next is the Sacrificial Fragments, for its EM stat being the second highest of all catalysts. The skill cooldown reset isn't the most relevant thing to have since it doesn't generate particles, but can be nice if you missed marking any enemies on the first skill use. Nahida's second best weapon is Yaimiko's signature Kagura's Verity. It performs similarly, if not better than Thousand Floating Dreams for an on-field build, but still is very good for an off-field build. Then finally, speaking of, 1,000 Floating Dreams. Generally Nahida's best weapon in most if not all all cases. It's got the highest EM stat in the game with a Gilded Dreams-esque effect. Depending on the elements of the characters in your party, the weapon will give the wielder different buffs. More EM for the same element, or more elemental damage bonus for every different element. As a bonus, it also gives 40 EM to the rest of your party. Either way, a really nice buff to Nahida's own damage and a small but appreciated party EM buff. So all in all, Nahida has a wide range of weapon choices for different levels of investment and state of account. Even though I said that certain weapons beat others, in reality, you're free to use any of them and still have her be amazing. But what if you wanted her to be stronger than she already is? Let's see what her constellations have to offer and if they're worth pulling for. Short answer, no. Just no. She is essentially complete at C0, and every constellation upgrade is extremely overkill for any type of content the game has to offer. But if you so choose to do it anyways, let's see what you're getting. Nahida C1 can either be really pointless or meh at best. What it does is act as if her burst buff is counting one more character for every one of the elements. So what that means is if you only had one pyro character in the party, it'll act as if you had two. Or even if you didn't have any of an element, say hydro, the burst would still act as if you had one. So this is a pretty nice buff depending on the teams you want to use. But besides that, it's a pretty nothing constellation. This next one though will blow your mind. Nahida C2 is the best point to stop at, bar none. Any enemy that has the Seed of Skanda mark on them from Nahida's skill can now take crit damage from Burning, Bloom, Hyperbloom, and Burgeon, where the crit rate and crit damage for those are fixed at 20% and 100% respectively. On top of that, for 8 seconds after an enemy is hit by Quicken, Aggravate, and or Spread, their defense is reduced by 30%. This is a crazy, albeit unnecessary, damage upgrade for Nahida, with the defense reduction being especially powerful. C3 and 5 give 3 talent levels to Nahida's skill and burst respectively. C3 seems nice at first, but it only boosts the scaling damage, not reaction damage. Meanwhile, C5 is a small but appreciated buff to the buffs on her skill. Nahida C4 gives her an EM buff depending on how many nearby enemies are marked by her skill up to 4 levels, 100, 120, 140, and 160. Really nice buff in a situation with a lot of enemies, and makes it easier for her to max out her passives. Nahida C6 is wholly unnecessary, but it front loads her damage to a crazy degree. If the Shrine of Maya from her burst is active and she's attacking an enemy marked with Seed of Skanda, her next 6 normal and charged attacks do an extra attack called Tri-Karma Purification, Karmic Oblivion, I just really wanted to say that are boosted by 200% of Nahida's attack and 400% of her EM. Very strong on-field Nahida upgrade, and makes it so you can activate more reactions in that time as well, since they're counted as separate hits from the regular Tri-Karma Purification. To cap off on Nahida's constellations, they are really unnecessary as she's already a powerhouse at C0, but they are very worthwhile upgrades if you want to crack her out or just like her that much. Like I said, the best stopping point is at C2 for the crit reactions and defense reduction from the additive reactions. With the build and constellations out of the way, what teams can you put Nahida in? Oh, who am I kidding? She has too many options! Quicken, Hyperbloom, Burgeon, Nilou-Bloom, and BurnMelt archetypes. I'm pretty sure that's all the info you'll ever need. Okay, fine. This is a guide, so I'll be proper about it. Let's start with Quicken Teams. This includes both Spread and Aggravate. This team follows the mold of Nahida, 2 electro characters or another Dendro, then either an animal support to buff the electro or reaction damage, or a defensive support. This team can be run with basically any character of those elements, so really pick the best you've got, but I'll give you a rundown anyways in case you're not sure. You can choose to run Nahida as the on-fielder, or electro characters like Keqing, Scion, Raiden, Lisa, Yaimiko, or Razor, but you can also choose to run another Dendro as your on-fielder like Tignari or Alhaitham. For that second Electro Dendro slot, if you're going for Electro, it'd be a more offense-oriented team. Fischl, Beidou, Yaimiko again, Kuki Shinobu, and Lisa are great for that slot. In terms of Dendro choices, you've got Yaoya for healing, Kirara for shielding, or Baiju for both. For that last slot, if you're choosing to use an animal character, you might have to be careful about how you're setting up your Electro, since Nahida's Dendro application is particularly strong and will overwrite the Electro if you're not careful. That being said, your best choices are Sucrose, Kazuha, Venti, Jean, Hazel, or Lynette. So pretty much most of the animal cast. Otherwise, if you don't want to put up with the complicated application, you can also use Zhongli for his shield to bypass the need for a healer and his universal resistance reduction. Second team archetype is Hyperbloom, or Quick Bloom, which mixes in Quicken alongside Hyperbloom. These teams are generally more effective in single target scenarios. It generally has Nahida, an Electro slot, a Hydro slot, and a Free slot. For the Electro slot, they can be divided up into off-field or on-field triggers. For the off-fielders, they should solely be built for maximizing their EM as much as possible. The main characters for this role are Raiden or Koki Shinobu. In terms of on-fielders, this would make it more of a Quick Bloom team, so their builds can be a mix of EM and their talent scaling stat to do their personal damage. Sano, Lisa, Yaimiko, Kuching, and Razor do great for this role. In your Hydro slot, either on-fielder or off-fielders work here, but unlike Electro characters, you don't have to change their traditional builds whatsoever. Sincho, Yelan, Nuvilet, Ayato, Kokomi, Barbara, Candace, and Tartaglia are your main choices here. Then for that last slot, you can choose to add a defensive support if you don't already have any of them in the list I mentioned in Baizhu, Kirara, Jin, Sayu, or Zhongli. Or if you don't need one by this point, you can just use another Dendro, Electro, or Hydro if you've got any to spare. Next, Burgeon. Basically Hyperbloom teams, except the Electro slot is now a Pyro slot. This can be better for more AoE scenarios, but it is higher maintenance since Burgeon also hurts your active character, so you want a sufficient enough healer to keep up with it. Nevertheless, for the Pyro slot replacing the Electro one, Toma, Klee, Yunfei, really any character that has any Pyro or can get a Pyro infusion at all. Oh wait, Bennett C6 can give exactly that. Then lastly Kazuha, but only if you can swirl Bennett's field. Speaking of Bennett, not only is he good for that, but you can offset the damage you're taking from the cores with his healing as well. For your Hydro slot, the same characters can be applied here from the Hyperbloom section. Then for the Flex slot, add in a healer if you haven't done so yet, preferably of the Dendro or Hydro variety, or just Bennett. Fourth is Nilou-Bloom. Nilou is the only way for Pure Bloom to see some modicum of actual usage, so she's required. Unlike Burgeon or Hyperbloom, this team needs to be purely made up of Dendro and Hydro characters for it to work properly. Like Burgeon, however, Bloom also severely hurts your active character if you're not careful about it, so a healer is also required. Good candidates for that are Kokomi, Barbara, Yaoyao, or Baizhu. From there, add in another Dendro or Hydro character. The last team archetype I'll mention is BurnMelt. BurnMelt is possible because Cryo doesn't have a direct reaction with Dendro, but instead works by triggering Melt off of the Pyro application left by burning. Granted, this is a much less safer way of playing Melt, but it is relevant enough of an option to include it if you want to use it. Team setups will generally include Bennett, a Cryo character, then a Flex slot for defense or to help the Pyro application. Good Cryo picks are Ganyu, Rosaria, or Kaya. For that last slot, you can use an animal support to further boost the damage with 4-piece VV, with Kazuha typically being the best. Or go the defensive route with Zhongli, or, funnily enough, Dea. Dea can actually make for a good choice here. She's Pyro and has damage reduction, interruption resistance, and periodic hits to keep the burning aura on enemies. That is it for Nahida's teams. While there are more nuanced team setups that can serve as decent options, I've already made this video long enough as it is. But if you still want me to go through those, subscribe to the channel and I can do that in another video. Now, all of that probably sounded really convoluted, but trust me, she's really easy to actually play. Don't believe me? Then let's do a showcase. For this showcase, I'll be using Nahida at level 90 C0 with a level 90 Sacrificial Fragments at Refinement rank 5, minimum level 8 for her talents, and on 4-piece Deepwood Memories. Here's the main build. Let's show off the power of Lesser Lord Kusanali. Roll the clips.
Stabilize.
Let's make her a little. Make yourselves at home.
Midnight Venta.
With sword comes shadow. Speed of light. Incoming. Hey!
Solidify.
Committed to memory. By royal decree. Yes! Sharing my knowledge. Cut to the chase. Don't blink. Incoming. Hey!
Stabilize.
Wings of dark. Nowhere to hide. Don't blink. Hey! Oz revealed. Incoming. Cut to the chase. Nowhere to hide. Hey!
Witness the power of Guhua! No, my sword! Oh, busted. Things are about to get dicey.
Grow, grow, grow! Make yourself a home! I see everything!
Our bond is strong! Out of my way! Let me weave you a bird. Quiet now. Game's up. Fun's over.
Hey! The Temple of Wisdom!
Body and dissipate! I'll settle this! No, my sword! Gotcha!
This may hurt a little.
Rain cutter! Things are about to get dicey.
Make yourselves at home!
Rain cutter! Rain outlines your...
Here's backup! Fire it up!
Allow me! Grow, grow, grow!
Check this out!
The Temple of Wisdom! Everyone hold hands!
Time to... Let me weave you a bird.
Supporting fire!
The Temple of Wisdom!
Huh? Teamwork is strict! Let's get it on!
Committed to memory!
Everybody stand! Buckle up!
We're way behind schedule.
Huh?
Hey! Sharing my knowledge!
I'm going in! Buckle up!
Let's wrap up this guide. Nahida is everything you'll ever need for DENDRO, and even heal with Prototype Amber, damn it! No matter what DENDRO teams you plan on running, she will never be a bad option. Better yet, your choices of teammates with her are also really flexible, to the point of only needing the general elements and rarely any absolutely specific characters. For more details, check out the KeqingMains Guides linked below the like button. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back for another video. See ya.